teacher. After teaching in public schools in the U.S. and Costa Rica, she worked in Washington, D.C. on issues of labor, women's reproductive health, and women's history, gender equality. She earned an MA in Latin American Studies at UC San Diego, focusing her research and teaching on examining textbooks and textbook policies and the powerful sense of belonging and social roles that they convey to her readers. She earned a PhD in education policy at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her expertise centers on the powerful role of policy in shaping education and teaching profession, also looking at the impact of social, cultural, and economic factors on teachers and teaching. And I'm so excited today. Well, let me just finish, there's just one more sentence left, and then I want to preview something. UB brought her back to Buffalo in 2008. She's conducting research throughout the Americas. Her studies in Buffalo center on policies related to teacher preparation, school food, school gardens, and the implementation of federal equity policies in the city's school district. And we're in for a real treat today. I think your research is fascinating. And we're going to start today's talk with a call to Santiago, Chile, to talk to one of Sarah's former students who's there during the military repression that just started a few days ago in that country. So I'll hand it over to you, Sarah, because I think you're making contact now with Ana Luisa.
I think so. Ana Luisa, ¿me escuchas? Can you hear me? Or can we hear you? Can you hear it? Aló. Yeah. Can
Now?
Yes. Hold on one second, because I'm going to try and connect you to a speaker so we can hear you more clearly. Habla. This. No, not happening. Okay. All right. I know you know how to speak to audiences, so hopefully my speaker from my computer will work. So I'm going to present Ana Luisa. This is Dr. Ana Luisa Munoz Garcia. She's in Santiago, Chile. She is an alumna of the Graduate School of Education and especially the ELP department. And I actually want to, something I was thinking about on the way to the talk today, Ana Luisa, which is really humbling and moving, is this. And it is that I participated in a Feminist Research Alliance many moons ago. In fact, I think it was 11 years ago. And it was at that time, that I was here because it was a mentor-mentee situation where a junior faculty was invited by a senior faculty, and my invited person was Greg Demetriadis. Greg and I came, and he encouraged me to talk about the work that I was doing. And the reason I say that not only is because here I am again, but also here I am again, and I'm here with Ana Luisa, and I'm so grateful that you had the time. And more importantly, a little history, UB history. The last dissertation that Greg Demetriadis read, the last committee he sat on, the last dissertation he approved was Ana Luisa's.
Wow.
We were on that committee together, and it's meaningful. And just a shout out, because you're such a badass, and I can use those terms for her. At that discussion of the dissertation, Greg said, he said, "It's the best dissertation I have ever read."
Wow.
And he read a lot of them. And he read a lot of good ones, but that's what he said, and it was the last one, unfortunately, he read before he left us. So yeah, so this is really special, and so we're here for Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, it is complex. I mean, Greg was such a, you know, that important influence to read society for me, you know. So yeah. Okay, hello. Sorry I don't have so much time because I have to move 11 kilometers to go to a feminist assembly, a feminist meeting. So I need to ride 11 kilometers, so I really have to leave around 40 minutes more. I don't know how to start, to be honest, because I was explaining to Sarah by audio message that we are still in shock. So I am trying to process. Actually, I just come back today to my home to have this meeting or to change clothes because I had to move to another friend's house because this is a very unsafe zone in some ways because it's a very highly political neighborhood. So army is in the street day and night. which is scary in some way because they are shooting and we are in unconditional curfew or martial law, which is kind of complex, to be honest. I have no explanation how this starts so fast. It started with the government increased like around 10 cents the ticket of the subway, and that how it started 1 week ago. And after that, everything was really, really quick. So I have no idea in what moment this changed so fast. So what we have now is a martial law on the one hand, but at the same time, the army and the police in the street, with thousands of people detained, hundreds of women denouncing sexual abuse and violations by the army, plus several people died already in 4 days. A lot of people being shooting, so it's kind of complex to explain. However, this is happening after a strong also feminist movement 2-3 months ago in Chile since the last year, which this feminist movement also has been claiming or expressing in which ways this neoliberal system of the Chilean society can be criticized or can be questioned by a feminist standpoint. And there are two kind of main points that are highly connected with this feminist critique, but at the same time, with what is going on in Chile. As you know, the neoliberalism system in Chile was created during the dictatorship in the 80s, and it's kind of the cradle of neoliberalism. You know, Chile was the experiment of the application of the neoliberal policies. So what people feel is that we live in a constant system of abuse because we don't have basic rights of equal education, health system, pension system, and so on. So it's everything now, actually, the government say that the ticket will not be increased, that we will not have a rise of the ticket in the subway. However, people don't care. It's deeper than that. So from the feminist standpoint, the two main questioning that we have in Latin America to the neoliberal system, in the case of Chile, on the one hand is this, I don't know sure is the word, but extractivist way, extractivismo, that the system, mostly from the companies, they have with the nature. So we, in this moment, we are going also to a major crisis of water, because in Chile, even water is not public, it's private, and the government sold the rights of water to mostly transnational companies, so we don't have water, and people they cannot grow up the farms because it's in the hands of big companies. And many women, mostly indigenous women, and here I am bringing some ideas from the colonial feminism, have been killed because of they are defending the rights of the waters, the rivers, the mountains, the forests, the lands. We say defensoras de la tierra, that means women who are defending lands in Latin America and in Chile. And this is one of the main critiques that the feminist has been positioning. And on the other hand, trying to break some myths about what it means to live in a neoliberal society. For example, the idea of freedom, that is really strong in this country, that we have to choose, when we already know that many women, for example, abortion, they cannot choose. The school that we go, we cannot choose. It depends on your salary because it's private, mostly private education. And the same with the health system, to have access to health insurance. Even that we have health insurance, it's very complex that they really pay for our health system when we need it. You know, actually, 2 months ago, I have a big surgery in my eyes, and they drastically changed completely how much they will cover in my surgery, like from the 90% to the 40%, which is a lot of money. And there is nothing I can do. Is that okay? Why you change it? There is nothing I can defend to myself in front of the health insurance companies in Chile. So all those kind of small situations, when you think from a feminist standpoint, what the feminist movement has done is say to make visible all those injustices and in which ways all those inequalities are also stronger for women in the case of pensions, in the case of health issues, in the case of education. So when we have a very strong idea or myth from the neoliberal system that women can choose to go to work, it's a very strong, it's an idea that you can go to work but in a very precarious situation with a very low salary in Chile. The minimal wage, the minimal salary is $500. However, the cost of living in Chile is really high. I mean, to buy food, I was living last year in Denmark, and in Denmark, it's cheaper than Chile. I am vegetarian, so I was buying the same stuff. And it's like, believe I am paying less in food in Denmark, which is a very high standard country, than in Chile, where the salaries are very low. So this is one issue, and the other issue that the feminism in Latin America has been working strongly is to make visible the inequalities that we have as women, mostly in front of a system that we don't feel protected in the basic rights, like as I say, and how those how you say that we feel that we are in a structural violence, and that violence is symbolic, but at the same time is material. So how we make visible those inequalities that are very violent. For us, for example, to see a teacher who is 80 years old, 90 years old, working in the street because they don't have a pension system, or the pension system is so low that it's like $200 per month. Nobody lives with $200 per month. So to make visible those inequality in a material way. So that is something has been a very strong task for us, like to show that, to make visible that, to talk about that. And I think that there are different examples I can bring up. I can be all day long telling stories, which is not the idea. And on the other hand, it's the idea how women, I have some ideas for it, and that's why I am looking to the other way. How the neoliberal capitalism is a dispositive of oppression of women. For example, the austerity, reforms we have, where usually that means that more women have to work more at home than and also outside, where we have a very machist society, So we don't have this kind of, shared chores, and we don't share work at home so much as other societies in at least Europe, I guess. So I will stop now. I think there are different kind of narratives we have been breaking, which is difficult in a moment like this to organize different ideas, but I think I will start with that. If you have a question, it will be easier for me to explain. And thank you.
Thank you, Ana Luisa. I'm going to put you this way so maybe you can see everyone who's present, and I'll take that away. What questions do people have for Ana Luisa?
I just want to know about martial law. Is there a curfew 24/7? How are you managing in terms of your own safety, and what do you see as sort of the future outcome in the just short term in the next week or so of this crisis?
Yeah. That is a great question. I mean, actually, I am going to a feminist meeting for that too. There are two things. There is it's unconstitutional. It's not legal what is going on here. The president to do that curfew is usually from 7 p.m., 6 p.m., depending on the day, to the next day, 6 a.m. It's not legal because the president to do that had to leave the power and give it to the militaries, and that is not happening. So the army is working without responsibility, because it's the responsibility of the president, because he's in charge. He's still in charge. So this is one thing. The second thing, as feminists, what we have been doing in this moment, what we are doing, actually, there are three things. One is we are organizing to create different kind of information, videos, and info infography, we say, photographies that explain to women what to do in case to be arrested, mostly because there are different denounced complaints that they are being sexual harassed and violated by the army. So to screen the name first is very important, but at the same time to claim basic rights, like you don't have to be naked. That is something that they are using a lot. Like you have to be naked when you get arrested as a woman. They put you in a car and they ask you to leave your clothes, which is illegal. You cannot. I mean, Chile is not like the way that the police should act. And the second one is to create different ways of how you say to be safe, to not walk alone. Mostly if we are in the night, we cannot walk in the street anyway in the night. But during the day in the march, that to be always with your cell phone with battery, and to have all the numbers about the feminist lawyers, the association. We have a feminist lawyer association in Chile, which in this moment are overwhelmed, but also to have the number of the Institute of Human Rights, which also is overwhelming because we have thousands of detentions every day. Thousands. It's not hundreds, it's thousands. So they really are asking in this moment more voluntaries to help them to process information to the lawyers, because there is not enough lawyers in this country. It looks for this situation. We were not expecting something like that. I mean, it's something that took us for a surprise. And the third issue that we are doing is offering houses, mostly because if the martial laws took you in Santiago is a big city. So if you are in the street and you have to go inside, so offering houses that you can live there because you will not have enough time to get home, mostly walking, because we don't have subway. In this moment, the subway is not operating. The public system of transportation is not operating because protesters burned most of them actually in this moment. So there are a small stuff that we are creating in order to coordinate each other, to support each other, because that is what we can do in this, and to prevent detentions. That is the main issue. So if we know a woman is detained by the police or by the army, it's priority for human rights who are women mostly, but for feminist lawyers it's the priority, because we know that the exposition of women is bigger than the men, because the fact we are women in a macho society. So that are the things that we are doing in this moment. I have to explain that this is now, it's just 4 days. For the first 2 days, we were in shock. I mean, I was in shock. I moved to another house to protect myself, to be better, to feel better. So the last 2 days, we are answering. I am an academic, so I am the president of the Chilean Association of Researchers, which is kind of the ARA in your country. So we write a statement to say we will not support these actions. We are not agree with what is going on. We refuse to stay silent, and we are raising voices about that. And at the same time, from the School of Education of the Catholic University where I am from, and asking for international support, mostly because we need that in order to establish a pressure to the government to stop this violation of human rights, which is, for them, is like nothing. They are very attached to the discourse of we need to protect the companies, we need to protect supermarkets, we need to protect pharmacies, which is, for us, is not, you cannot compare life with a supermarket, you know? But most of the justification of violation of human rights is based on that, and that the fact that the army need to protect supermarkets, need to protect pharmacies, which are the target of protesters, are usually pharmacies, because in Chile there has been a lot of scandals from the pharmacist companies because the collusion of prices, mostly with old people, which are the poorest ones, you know, they don't have a good pension system, and the collusion of medicines from the pharmacies the target is old people. So the anger that people have go against to those institutions that represent oppression. Like, for example, yesterday, the School of Economy of my university was completely burned. Why? Because that was the school where the Chicago boys the ones who implemented the neoliberal model in Chile in the 80s, are from. So it was completely ruined. So banks, supermarkets, pharmacies, all those, how you say, insurance, health insurance, pension system, how you say, causes, are the ones who are the target of the protester, mostly because it represents a model. It represents the economical model that we are not happy with that.
Are the universities shut? Are they all shut down right now? Are you having classes in the university?
No. The type is that, I mean, we don't have transportation first, so most of people cannot get to the universities. In Santiago, because it's a big city,
It's spread out.
depends
It's not
on
a
the
high
subway.
city. It's a,
It's like New York.
it's a
If the
mess.
subway crash, it's impossible to move. And the buses are not going on because it's dangerous for them too, because protesters are boarding buses too. So all of the universities are shut down during the entire week now. Some of them are asking assemblies, like meetings, to reflect, to think, which usually happens outside the university or in the memory museum or some cafes. For example, now I am going to a meeting in a cafe, and also because we have a state of exception, that's the name, state of emergency, which means you cannot meet with other people. We cannot have meetings. That is illegal. So most of the coordination of meetings actually happens by Telegram, Signal, those kind of message apps that the government cannot follow us.
Is this only in Santiago? Is it gone national, the crises?
National.
It is
In
national.
this moment, it is not. It started in Santiago with the subway tickets, but in this moment, it's completely national. The entire country is shut down. Actually, the board, the miners are supporting this. People in the north, wherever you go, is stopped. The most of the countries are protesting, and because we cannot go in the street, most of the protest is with the boats and prison. Yeah.
they're banging pots. It's called cacerolazo. It's used in Latin America now as a form of protest, especially when the ability for people to gather to protest has been cut down. So someone might just start by banging a pot on their balcony, and that will attract others. And sometimes that leads to smaller, intimate settings and assemblies of neighborhoods within the neighborhood. But that's how they've.
Do you know
High tech.
Do you know of people who have been arrested? Students, colleagues? Are there any desaparecidas that disappeared happening again?
Yeah, I have some students and I have some friends. We are looking, I am not with because I am not in this moment, but there are people, mostly the lawyers from INEDH, which is the Institute of Human Rights. They are looking for them, and also the ABOFE, the feminist lawyers, this is the association. We don't know because also there are two in this moment institutions that are representing people, the police, which is illegal, and the army, which is illegal. So when they took you, you don't know, they take you, you don't know where they will move you. So I insist, Santiago is a big city, so to move different police stations, and you will spend the day, so it's very difficult to track people. That's why for us, for example, as a formation, it's very important not just to know the name of the person that they are taking, their ID number, but also the police, every police has in their hat, in their helmet, they have a number, to know that number, because with that number it is easier to track what could maybe be. But what is going on that the army is using, since yesterday, is using the subway station as torture center. So this is really out of our mind because we are still in democracy. We cannot believe we are having torture. They are torturing people and we are in democracy. We cannot believe that, for us, it's unthinkable. It's just not something we can even dimension. Trust me, it's just unthinkable, to be honest.
What can we do?
We are not. I have be honest, we are not prepared for this. We were prepared for social revolts. We are prepared for protesting because this is a system that is not sustainable without repression. But we are not prepared to live with the repression we are living in this moment. In democracy, it's out of our. I mean, it's difficult to believe, to process that is happening. And there are videos. It's not something that we read, because you can be reading some fake news that is happening. But there are videos that this is happening, and how they are shooting young people for nothing, like, and they are taking people from inside home, which is illegal too. So most of the stuff the army is doing is not just unconstitutional, it's outside of our constitution. So the president, I hope so, someday will pay for that, because in this moment he's in charge. But also, what they are doing is illegal. Like, they can stop us. In our constitution is a word, is control people. Control. It means they can ask our ID, who you are, what you're doing here, period. They cannot detain us, let alone from inside of our houses. So why move it to another place is because I live in a big avenue. And so the tanks were passing, and the guys were shooting up, shooting to the buildings up. And we just say, I mean, we are just protesting from inside of our houses. Protest is a right here. We don't have in our constitution the
prohibition. Yeah.
For protesting. This is part of our culture. We can protest. We should. I mean, we can. The issue is now, because we are in hands of the army, whatever it's looking like.
Yeah.
And that is something that we don't know how to handle.
Two things that you said to me since we've been talking that are really resonated with me was, first, that you said, this is something I read about in history books, and yet it's happening on the streets now. And the second was that you said that you have been working as an educator and as a feminist to cultivate civil society, a society that seeks and expects human rights to be respected. But then this is happening, and it's not a history book anymore. It's your students who are the actors on the front line of political repression. It's not your fault.
No. I don't believe, and I don't go into the individual responsibilities of that. This is a system, and we are product of that system. We have a long discussion with the academics, my doctoral students, and the academics of researchers I work with during the last 2 days, mostly by hangout. And one of the conversations we have is like, we cannot fall into what I didn't do it in the past, because we have been doing what is in our hands. And I have been writing against neoliberalism in my publications. I have been writing and also discussing about how neoliberal policies are interconnected with gender policies too. I have been discussing about what, as feminists, we can do to improve or to have a better life. There is a strong message in this protest that is dignity. Because what we are asking, and today in the Congress, most of the discussion is like, we need human dignity. It's not dignity to have a woman in the street because they don't have a basic pension system. It's not dignity to be sick. And actually, I was organizing last week, completada, selling hot dogs, because I have a friend I run with, and she has 2 cancers. And in Chile, because if you have cancer, you die. There is no possibility that the health insurance will cover that. So what we do usually we do some kind of bingo. I don't know if you know that word, bingo.
Yeah.
Or how you call that?
Yeah, bingo.
Bingo, or some kind of selling hot dogs in the street, or empanadas, which is some kind of stuff that we eat to have money to support someone. It's very little, but in some ways it helps. So that is not dignity. If I am sick, even in the United States, you have a much better insurance than here. And you are always a very liberal country. So actually many of the things, of the reflections I had about my own system is coming from outside. You know, the fact I was in the United States, that also is well known by as a very neoliberal country, and even there is much better than here, your insurance system. And then when I was in Denmark, you know, I almost got depression. You know, I was looking around me and it's like, these people live. We are in a constant, I am 40 years old, and we're in a constant state of surviving. We survive in this country, you know, like with our salaries. Even I feel a very privileged woman because I am an academic, I have an okay salary. To buy a house or to buy a place to live is, you have to in-depth your entire life, which is not okay. We shouldn't be surviving all the time, you know. We cannot continue living in this state of fear. I always feel afraid. I am a super healthy woman. I eat healthy. I take care of myself so much. I don't do anything that can be dangerous because if I get sick, forget it. I am in debt my entire life if I don't die before. So those kind of questions are relevant for us as academics, you know, and we have been positioning those questions. The issue is that in which way those questions resonate, because we are so accustomed to live in this way for 40 years or more that it's very difficult for us to see otherwise. And that is another challenge for us as feminists, you know, how we think a life that can be otherwise for us, how we can think outside of this system, of this structure. And that is our challenge, you know, how we can really make invisible those oppressions, make invisible those inequality. We can start to dream and say, you know, we need, I don't know how to say this word, horizons,
Yes.
or horizons, to create new horizons for our life, or for our future, actually.
Well, Ana Luisa, what can we do from here?
I don't want you to get so, I see your faces and I feel sad. But I want to say something that is positive from this. You have no idea how much solidarity you can see in these moments. This is something touched my heart. That is one. Actually, last year, most of the whole day is the stuff with the bots, you know. But last night, many singers start to sing from the balconies because this city is full of buildings. And so people was listening and, you know, clapping for them. And then another singer in another place started to sing very, very, very strong, and everyone was listening in the city. And then we continue with the bots. So that's for me is a way also that we are taking care. You know, like we need moments of peace because, to be honest, to be day and night with the bots, I love percussion. Believe me, that stuff is too much. And the second thing is that we can dream. We are not sleeping anymore. You know, like we in this moment we already know that we don't want this anymore. We have no idea how this will end. We don't know yet. It doesn't look that it will be a change sooner. However, we have hope, and we do know that some things will change, at least. And that is something that we are seeing today in the Congress, and so we think that at some point this will change. It cannot be worse, that is for sure. So that is hope. And the second thing, what you can do from international perspective, well, support, you know, like we have Twitter, I guess you have Twitter, Facebook, look what is going on in Chile, the news, we are in the news, so post things, reflect also, but also this is invitation. I mean, this is, I guess, Chilean scenario, economical situation is the worst in terms of the neoliberal policies. But you in your own countries, I am sure you have all these kind of scenario too, to reflect on that, to think what is not okay, like those kind of questions had been, and Sarah knows me very well because she was a great advisor of my academic life and path in UB. To have those questions that give you rethinking, that tensions what is going on, is what moves me as academic, as a feminist, as a woman, as academic, as an activist. So keep in mind those questions, what doesn't resonate with what you live day to day. And I think because we have those tensions in new generation, when I say new generation, I'm not thinking so much about me, a little younger, and that is the question. These guys, I mean, from the government, one of the arguments was that, but we didn't increase the ticket of the students, the train ticket for the students. We increased the prices of the tickets for the adult people, not the students. But the students know how much their parents struggle. They know how much adult generation are struggling with money. And they were saying, no, it's true. We are not being the benefit. We don't have a benefit from this protest. But we are in solidarity with adults who are struggling so much. And that idea that usually we believe that young generations are very individualistic. They think in themselves. No, they have a very clear movie about what it means to be in solidarity with other people. And the same for the middle class, even in Chile, the upper class, the super upper class neighborhoods are protesting. And they are protesting because they say, you know what, we are also struggling with this. Even that we have high salaries in this country. We are, because in Chile, the region is so focused in 7 families. 7 families in Chile are the owners of the ocean. We are not the owners of the ocean. We have a huge ocean. The land, the forest, the water. So, to be honest, that is what we want to question today. So, what you can do, just support, think about your own reality. That is a lot,
Thank you so much, Ana Luisa.
Thank you to you.
Thank you. Perfect.
I have to move to the assembly.
Yeah. Can
Be safe.
Yes, and be safe is what everyone is saying. Okay,
No.
seguimos en contacto, mi amor. Okay, chao.
Ciao.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
for contacting her. That was amazing.
Thanks for, like, I can hear my family like, thanks for the depression. But thanks for the reality check too, and that was so typical of Ana Luisa too. At the end, she wasn't really asking for herself. In the end, she was like, I really want you to question what's happening in your place. Mostly, that also comes from a very like anti-colonial perspective too. She's saying, you know what, you've got stuff that I know you probably need to fix in your own spaces of existence, and so what is it that you need to question and push back on in the space that you inhabit to make life better and more just for everyone that you share that space with. And actually, Carrie and I were talking right before this, and it came up like, well, this seems so unreal and so distant from the United States context. But then we started brainstorming, and it really isn't, because we can identify groups that are repressed and faces oppression and face systems of apartheid that exist within the United States borders. And so that could be the Native Americans who are protecting and fighting for land and water and their rights and the respect for their treaties in a country that claims to be for treaties and the rule of law. It could be African Americans, it could be the Latinos, and the Latinx population, and the population that's being incarcerated right now as close as Batavia, that is families that have been separated from each other on the border and then sent, just like she said, moving people around, so it's difficult to find them. And so we have people who are detained in Batavia from the border with Mexico, and their families are in other places too. They were separated from their families. So there's actually a fundraiser tomorrow. They were hoping for UB faculty and students to support by giving money and any kind of support you can to detainees that are released, so that they can make phone calls. So can you pay for a phone card, or can you pay for a bus ticket? What can you do to provide them help? So I can share that with you too. That's
Marla Segal?
Marla. Yeah, I think.
It's called Justice for Migrants,
Yeah.
and it's an organization, and we can give you details about it too.
Yeah. So I just I can't up that, and I wouldn't want to at all. I do want to stress that the two things that we had been talking about together were this idea that, wait, this is something I read about. Like I was taught about this. That's in the past, but that it's not. It's the present. I appreciated how she kept talking about, but we're living under a constitution. We still have a democracy. So this denial that has been taken away from the citizens of Chile, and the ongoing efforts to claim rights and to do so based on law and policy that is on the books. Like not giving that up. Yes, it's being disrespected at this moment, but to not forget and to continue to educate people about their rights and how laws and how engagements with military or with police is actually by law supposed to transpire. So that actually is a good segue to the material, the questions I have, the research that I do, and what I'm most impassioned about doing with this career that I have, and the energy I have, and that is really highlighting how policy works and trying to understand how policy works, but never forgetting that policy is not something that's neutral. It is tainted from its inception with the systems of oppression and advantaging and disadvantaging particular groups. So what I actually have, I don't have text for all of my slides, but I did text for 2 of my slides just because I wanted to make sure I at least had like a takeaway or the point that I was trying to make would be clear. So this is one of them. So my basic point that I hope to make today is that gender and policy work together, and we heard a lot of that in the examples that Ana Luisa was giving, not only about what was happening on the ground now, but what her and other feminist colleagues had been doing prior to this repression, and that is focusing on making inequality visible, highlighting that there are supposedly choices, and those choices are dictated by policies, but that they're not really choices in and of themselves. The other thing that's important, and also it is a tie-in to what Ana Luisa was talking about, is that I also believe you have to intertwine history and context with any examination of gender and any examination of policy and the relationship, because they're inseparable. And again, this Carrie goes back to what we were talking about before we called Ana Luisa too, where it was like the question of, so we have the same language being used by our president in the United States right now. And for example, just 2 days ago or yesterday, Pineda, which is the president of Chile right now, said, we are at war with our enemies. We've heard that before. The president of the United States has used that language before, multiple times in the last 2 years. What makes it different? What happens on the ground? And I think that has to do with history, sadly. So, but that's too simple. It's too simple too. It needs to be complicated. The other point I wanted as the takeaway about this gender policy tango is that they're multi-scaled. They work in and at the interstices of individuals and groups, relations and interactions, and they work through systems and institutions too. And that happens somewhat simultaneously. The implications are represented in who teaches whom what, for what purpose, why, and how, with what outcomes. And so there I'm really pulling it into the work and my concern for understanding how these processes take place within the institution of education in different democratic societies. The questions my research is generally oriented toward are, so how do gender and policy work together? How can we tell that? What does knowledge of how they work in cahoots provide us in our efforts to transform education and society? So not just trying to document, but I do think the documentation and do think the description or the testimony is very important and crucial, but what are we going to do with that understanding of how it works towards theorizing change? So of late, that change thing is on my mind a lot, and I have returned to two theories. One is theory of politics, and another is theories of policy enactment. And most importantly, I'm concerned about how do they work together. I'm trying to conceptualize what their relationship is. So that's what I'm actively writing about, and that's what I'm in the field conducting research on right now, to try and conceive of politicizing the policy enactment that I know happens in schools on a day-to-day basis. So, so I threw out like 4 or 5 terms just now and big concepts, so how do I define them? And this is where I get to go rogue. So I use the term gender, but what I'm really referring to is intersectional gender, and anyone can toss that back at me. I found myself putting intersectional gender in and then taking it out, mostly to streamline, like getting my point across. But in reality, when I'm doing research that's gender focused, I am always concerned about how the intersections or what other systems of oppression are intertwined with that enactment of gender, of policy. And then a couple terms, and these usually, it's funny, it depends on, I figured I didn't have to talk too much about gender for a Feminist Research Alliance, but the ones that I usually have to talk about a little bit more, depending on the audience, is the terms policy and what I prefer, policy processes. So I love to see like the emoji where your head's blown off. So policy is a text, but it is so much more. It's a discourse, it's a practice, but mostly we do understand it as something that's an instrumentalized way to solve a big problem. But it is so much more than that. And it's not just a piece of text, because someone wrote the text and someone has to figure out how to make that text something in the reality or in this social setting where it's supposed to be implemented. And so that's why I actually prefer and I think about policy as being a process. And that process is not linear. It's not the federal government passed something and then suddenly teachers on the ground are doing it. It's magic. No, it's not magic. It is this ongoing, constant negotiation of the meaning of the policy and the resources that come with it and the symbolic power that comes with it as well. So it's never neutral, it's not static, and it's multi-directional and multi-scale. So really, I also understand gender and policy to work in cahoots through this kind of extended look at how social reproduction happens. So we have individuals and groups, and they interact and they relate to each other, and they're all embedded in institutions and systems. Not that they're controlled by those institutions and systems, but that all of these things are interconnected and are shaping a particular social phenomenon that, as a social scientist, I'd be concerned with. And for me, that concern is understanding gender and policy in educational settings, the educational arena. In this, I put a question mark. Like, does this satisfy people who want to, be concerned about and do something about change or transformation in society? So. I already spoke about these, but basically I think of politics as a struggle for finite material and symbolic resources. It's not enough to control the money. The money gets you some power. It's like, what's that, like first you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the women. It's like some like really cheesy mafia movie. It is, there's something more than the resources. The resources are not just material, they are symbolic, and that matters as well, because with those resources comes power. I want these politics to interact in or be a part of the policy enactment process. And by that, what I mean, what is policy enactment? What does that mean? So a way that how policy gets done has been theorized is that, for example, a teacher hears about a policy, and it's not a dictum, though sometimes it feels like it, but in and of itself, the teacher has to create meaning for that policy. And that meaning then has to be translated into their classroom practice or professional comportment or how they engage with their school community. It could be any of those things. But it's not enough to say policy gets something done. It's how do people do policy, and how do they understand what the policy is meant to do in the first place. Because they might interpret the policy to be one thing and decide that they're going to enact it or they're going to practice it in a very different way. They're going to resist, or they're going to interpret it such that it benefits and supports the work they're doing with the school community that they are embedded within as teachers. So who am I to ask all of these crazy questions and be excited about these things? Well, that's me, and this is a photo that was taken, it's undated, it's sometime in the 70s. So this is Buffalo, a deindustrializing Buffalo. And it's in a decade that's also marked by policy transitions, and that's specifically court-ordered desegregation of the Buffalo Public Schools and the passage of Title IX. So we have lots of federal mandates and federal pushes into local communities to reshape and transform what's happening on the ground in our educational institutions. And that is definitely happening in Buffalo, but it's happening in the context of that deindustrialization, where you go to school and there's going to be desks empty the next day. Why? Because Bethlehem Steel laid off 30,000 people. And suddenly the snow is white in the wintertime, but that also means families don't have any money and they need to go somewhere, usually North Carolina or Florida or wherever it is, for a job. So that means less and less kids in the schools due to deindustrialization. It also means less kids in the schools because of the desegregation river too, as white flight occurs and white families are seeking the suburbs as refuges. So that's me. This is a picture that's taken at Performing Arts, the Arts Academy. It has many different names, Buffalo Academy for Visual and Performing Arts in the city. It's in the old building. The high school was originally Buffalo Technical High School. It's where my two grandfathers went to high school as well. My grandmothers never attended high school. They didn't have a chance to do that as working class women. But my grandfathers went there, and then I went there many decades later. But in this context, I desperately wanted to escape that local context, in which even at a young age, I was very aware of the work-life constraints, the expectations in a box for a blue-collar or working-class girl who was white, hetero, and cisgender. Now, the constraints of the gender, sexuality, class, race, ethnic identity were constraining. However, it's super important to acknowledge that I knew too, even then, the incredible privilege that I had and still have because of whiteness, because of English language, because of citizenship, because of ability, that even allowed me to envision an escape. So lately I've been reflecting on that personal narrative and those personal politics a lot, and why, to try and understand why I'm driven to do what I do. And so this talk reflects a little bit of that and where I am personally and professionally, because I don't separate the two. So what I'm struggling intellectually with at this moment as a public intellectual and activist academic are my experiences as a child in this educational context, the relationship of the context and institutions to individual agency and group dynamics that continue to reverberate in my work and in my life today. And I will say too, I'm still stuck with and chose to stick with Buffalo Public Schools. My children attend the schools. They're the fourth generation of my family attending Buffalo Public Schools. I have been director of a teacher education program that also has served the Buffalo Public Schools since I arrived here, and still have family in the city who are working class and also need to use the schools. They don't have the money to send their kids to private schools in the city. So for one, I also, the other thing is that I realized I think I was born an ethnographer, or at least have a really strong affinity for that methodology and related epistemologies. So I began my preparation in a way to theorize gender policy, the relation within these complex institutional settings with my own education a long, long time ago. And so that continues, and that continued as I sought opportunities to fill what I really saw as this vacuous US-centric education that I received that excluded global dimensions of history and politics, let alone a US-centric view of the US in the world. So in other words, I received this education that was so constrained to understanding the US as a standalone thing on this planet, and never even had the chance or wasn't presented in that education with a view beyond that of even how the US influenced or has affected the world during my lifetime. And most certainly, I hope that's changing now in US public schools and in Buffalo public schools in particular, which I think it is. So that's really what pushed me out into the world. And it really was this experience of wanting to get away from the US and using whatever I could to get to that other place that I was looking for. That led me to teach English in a rural school on a dormant volcano, which is now the second most active volcano in Costa Rica. I chose it, but I didn't choose it because I was interested in seeing what our neighbors looked like, so to speak. I really wanted to go to Senegal because I had been studying French for 10 years. I don't speak a word of French still, but I am bilingual in Spanish thanks to this first opportunity. I just needed to get out, and so I chose the first opportunity I had, and I had to wait a year and a half to get to Senegal, or I could go in 6 months and be in Costa Rica. So I ended up in Costa Rica, and I'm really grateful for what I learned from, and probably much more learned than taught in my rural school. And all the elements of my research agenda, I realized were planted. The seeds were planted in this year of teaching in this rural school. And they were, and I kind of synthesized them into ultra morada, which is really, ultra purple, teaching English and feeding students. So by ultra morada, I'm really, I was teaching a class. What do you learn in English or language classes? You learn your colors, you learn how are you, what's your name? So I was teaching colors, and all the boys were like, what is your favorite color? My favorite color is purple, ultra purple. And I was like, that just doesn't resonate with my understanding of masculinities and femininities. And this is in the 90s, I think things have changed, but they haven't changed that much. But these boys were wild about ultra purple. Why? I found out afterwards, it wasn't because they really loved purple and that, they didn't love the color purple, the movie, the book, anything. It was that it was the best soccer club in the country. It took me a while to figure that out because I was learning Spanish as I was figuring this out. But what this moment represents for me is this idea that our ways of being, our gendered ways of being, and these normative roles that we have shift in different settings, and yet they often don't shift. So their favorite color is purple, but it's really only because it's connected to a sports team. So that began my journey of questioning in a more critical and on-the-ground fashion and systematically what makes femininities and masculinities, what makes something masculinized and feminized, and how that's culturally and contextually situated. The next was the teaching students, so I think that's B. So teaching, and just teaching in general. I can humbly tell you I wasn't aware of how gendered teaching was when I started teaching. I was a teacher. I had been certified in New York as a social studies teacher. I had taught in New York State schools. I had taught in Virginia schools. But for some reason, I knew about the class dimensions of it. I was a working class person in the United States. That is an entry-level job out of working class status into a profession, and so I took it, and yet I didn't pay attention to the gender that's also woven into that the intersectional nature of the occupation of teaching. But I began to think much more deeply about that based on the experiences and the work that I was doing in that school. And then finally was the extra work of feeding students. Now I was very aware of care work and the gendered dimensions of that, but how that has deep implications for the work of teachers and also the quality of educational opportunity that's provided to students in schools just became so crystal clear to me. And I apologize for this. It's a very violent video, but this was, I showed up at, or image, but I showed up at work one day and there was the pig that was going to feed us for I don't know how long. And so I didn't have to do that part of the work, but I did the serving and making sure all students were fed. So that began my journey through the Americas and through 3 different basic tendrils that my research now represents. And the first is curricular work. And I'm not going to read these to you, but I wanted to quickly just show, I'll go through these slides. Basically, the next 3 slides are how I've divided up the work that I'm doing and into, they're basically the ways that I have organized my efforts to understand the relationship between gender and policy. So I've done that through research on curricular work as well as activist work around curriculum, which could be as simple as how I'm constructing my own curriculum here at UB, but it also could be the work that I would do with teachers in the area around their own curriculum and enacted curriculum. And then I list also just the ways that I've examined them. The next one would be education work, and so again, infused within this particular dimension has been a decade of work with an international research and activist group called Teachers Work, Teachers Unions, where we've connected people who are involved, who are teachers, who are researchers of teachers, and who are unionists, as they would say outside of the US, who are working to share best practices for supporting teachers' collective struggles to improve teaching conditions and education more generally, public education. So those are some of the questions. And then the last one, I played with the term a lot, but it really has to do with equity work, or really playing with this idea of how do we bring forth equity. And I find that most embodied by the work I do around school food, school gardens, and then this more general idea of urban education reform. And I actually, that last one, I have to shout out for my dean who just keeps pushing me. She keeps pushing me about my research in Buffalo Public Schools. She's like, you gotta question urban. It's not because she's denying that, or we should deny that Buffalo is an urban center, but it's the notion that the federal government has 3 categories for school districts. And then based on those 3 categories, you receive particular funding. So in the case of Buffalo, it's an urban district. It's treated the same way as a New York City school district, as an LA school district, a Chicago district, a Dayton district, Detroit, whatever. But the idea is that, is this homogeneous or monolithic category of urban sufficient for crafting policies that actually promote or bring about equity within the schools, in the school districts? Yeah. So that's where.
Can you tell us what the 3 urban,
Oh, yeah.
rural,
Suburban.
suburban? Oh,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
it. No, that's
Okay,
okay.
I'm sorry.
No, thank you for asking, because I called one of my sisters who's a teacher, to run this by her, and she was like,
Sorry.
What do you call where you live? And she was, oh yeah, suburb. Got it. Okay. Yeah,
Well,
we
because
forget about the suburb.
I can see that changing, because I can see, I live out just past East Aurora, and it's moving from being rural to being more suburban.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah. Well, and then we have something else, the phenomenon of first-ring suburbs. So what's a first-ring suburb? Well, it's a ring around metropolitan or urban districts, and those first-ring suburbs are now experiencing the same challenges to providing quality education to their students as the urban districts are. Yeah.
Yeah, and the rules are now.
And the rules too, I mean, rules have the same challenges. They too have the same challenges as urban environments too, in terms of poverty. They, and I think they have, it's a little different challenge in as much as they have populations that are becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. So suddenly a white agricultural community doesn't have just white farmer kids and maybe a couple of the merchants going to the schools. They now have migrant students as well, and some of them may not speak English either. So that's how, oh, that's it. But that's how I divide my work, and I didn't stress it as much, but I try to, but I find that what bubbles up within those three categories are dimensions of activism or engagement with communities as well. And so, I mean, just one example, it's a plug too, because I need to start recruiting for an event in the spring, but I was approached by Amherst High School last year, and an assistant principal had gotten permission to have an International Women's Day event, and the first one of its kind in the school. And the whole idea was to raise awareness about how women are celebrated, and femininity and feminism enters into schools in different places in the world, and they wanted to craft one that worked for them too. They also had the added dimension of wanting to do two other things. Number one is respecting the diversity of feminisms, respecting the fact that the diversity of women and their experiences, and then I guess there were three. And then the last one was so what do we do about this? What do we do about the fact that there is not gender equality? And so how do we build that into a high school program? That's just one day. And they're like, okay, you got this, Sarah? So we had a great event last year. Ana Luisa called in from Chile also and talked about activism and from Chile. I had Noemi Waite, who is a scholar here at UB, who also spoke. She's a science educator and works on STEM research and technology. She also spoke, and then we had a journalist talk about challenges to representing and women's issues and feminist issues in the news. So we are going to run that again. It will be in March, and they're looking to, well, we'll be looking for a whole lot of help. So if you're interested, maybe I'll put a plug out through.
Yeah, we'd be happy to help spread the word.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Every school district should do that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Media was super pumped about supporting it. You know, when I started working out with them, I usually don't work with suburban schools. So I reached out to teachers at one school, iPrep, because they had a principal who had talked about having women's studies classes there and was trying to support that, but we weren't able to galvanize around an event for last year. So, what questions do you have for me? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You showed up, that's awesome. Maybe it was just for the free food, that's still awesome.
No.
It was a terrific talk, it really was. It was amazing. What about the Chicago teacher strike? I saw in one of your slides, teachers' unions and gender equity and what Ana Luisa was saying about pay equity and having a livable wage is very much at the core of that strike.
Yeah, it is, and I wanted to highlight, because it's really important to acknowledge Chicago's getting good press, but these strikes are just, it's nationwide. There are fantastic, I just got in the mail from an organization called Labor Notes, who support across public and private sector workers, and they have a map of all the teacher strikes and actions that have happened in the United States. It's fantastic, and that I can take a picture of too to show, because it's so widespread. And my colleagues also were like, no, make sure they know Arizona spoke up, make sure they know, Washington State or West Virginia workers. I have a doc student who's from a West Virginia teacher. And so she's definitely shared with us how she's organized with her colleagues in a state that, that would have been unheard of. So a little bit of angst and then a little bit of gumption. Yeah, teaching is a feminine and a feminized profession, and it's an internally segregated profession as well. And the angst part of that is I just gave a talk on the phone to Georgetown Law that has a huge 2-year grant to explore this phenomenon of teachers' gender segregation from the Gates Foundation. And specifically, I called their bluff because they're like, well, we really want to understand how this works. And then I said, do you want to understand it because you're going to push for the fact that, you know, there's a need for men to be in the classroom? Is it because you're going to improve the salary for the majority of teachers who are already there? Like, what's your angle on this? What do they want to know? And they didn't give up any keys to the kingdom or the cash. But what I was able to describe to them was this internal segregation and hierarchy, and the gender nature of it, and explain what it means to be a feminine and a feminized occupation. So does anybody know, like, why we use those two terms when we're talking about occupations? I didn't know if there were any sociology folks. This is specific sociology stuff. Yeah. So we use the two terms, and we try to identify within the data on the occupations a head count. So that's, is it feminine or is it masculine? So are there more men or are there more women in the occupation? So that would determine the feminine and masculine. Then you have to do the tougher research, which is, does the nature of the work performed by the workers reflect what we consider men's work or women's work? And that's determined by the conditions under which they work, the level of education versus the pay that they receive, the promotion or career growth that's possible. So all of those are factored in to determine that second category of an occupation. But when you categorize them, the idea is you're trying to create this vista of how different occupations based on this gendering are treated so differently within the labor market and within an economy. So that, and then within that is the hierarchy of, when we think about who teaches the youngest kids, we're probably thinking about women, and we're probably thinking about young women, and you're absolutely right. And that changes as you go up the level to college, where we have more men who are professors, though I feel like that's changing and changing with time. So you have the feminine part of the category of teacher shift to masculine as you move up the U.S. Teaching profession. But then you have another segregation, and that's by knowledge. What counts as more masculine knowledge, what counts as more feminine knowledge. And my colleagues who run teacher education programs always joke, because I am a woman and I'm running the social studies education program, they're like, oh, but you got all the guys and the coaches over in social studies, which is actually true. Mostly. Anthony is a social studies educator. Yeah, it's usually mostly men in class, whereas any other teacher ed program is usually mostly women. Yeah, or it could be more. There's a little bit of balance. So it depends on the knowledge that's being taught, the expertise that the teacher has, whether it's also masculinized or feminized. So anyway, thank you.
Well, I just want to respond quickly to what you said about lunch just now. When I founded the Feminist Research Alliance workshop a long time ago, and I don't remember what year, I insisted on including lunch for reasons that have to do with gender and class.
There you go.
I'm so tired of being in an institution that's so hierarchical and so patriarchal.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of perks for certain sectors, but not generally for most, not sectors of the academy that include us generally.
Mm.
And I also feel like the administration really exploits faculty time in lots of ways. So the concept was that women are constantly having to multitask, but that the lunch is a gesture of respect for our time.
Mm.
That
Oh, I
if
didn't
we're
know
gonna,
that.
yeah, if we're going to
Right.
meet and talk
And
about
it's
each
our
other's
lunchtime.
work,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna treat our time respectfully by having lunch provided. That's the concept, and
That's so
I
funny.
think it's a good one. I'm gonna insist on it. So when Becky knows, like, there's sometimes pushback from Capen, and like,
Mhm.
why are you
Are
putting
you
so
charging
much
me for
money
this?
on food? And that I'm going to just insist on that. We are so screwed as an institute. We're, treated like the Feminine Institute, less than 10% of what the Humanities Institute budget is.
Hmm.
And we kind of pull our weight in the same
Oh, absolutely.
range, the same
Absolutely.
range. So anyway, that's just a little thing. Whatever
Very
I wanted
interesting.
to say is,
Oh, yeah, I would claim the food. Women do feed communities. It's not just this biblical thing, so to speak. The context of Latin America in particular, and in times that are very tough. And I think that I say Latin America, but this applies to North America too. What do poor women do? They pool their resources. They find ways to feed more people.
Well, I'm not sure you've been following this on Twitter, but the whole thing about school debt. So New Jersey's passed, I don't know if it's the state of New Jersey or certain school districts, that children with a school debt cannot go to field trips. So this was yesterday, and this is all over the news. So this is, New Jersey's not the only state, so there's this shaming of children.
How humiliating.
It is, it's a form of humiliation, absolutely, of poor children.
but that is actually connected to the other point I wanted to thank you for mentioning Greg, who was always one of the greatest
Yeah.
supporters of the Gender Institute, and he participated in this room so many times in so many helpful ways. And Anna Louisa was just great, and your presentation was so interesting. But on that, the one question I had was when I just want to
Too many go back.
question the slide where you gave a definition of politics.
All right.
As struggle for finite
Yeah.
material and symbolic. Okay, what I just want to suggest is that the construction of finite is very ideological and already politicized. So I feel like that definition is erasing the politics that goes into creating finitude. What I mean by that is, if you think of a school district, if you think of American education in general as having extremely finite resources,
And
the
then-
U.S. military doesn't experience the same kind of finitude.
Yeah.
So it's a social construct that is devaluing education, and it's very political. If you look at food, for example, the idea of food being finite is a political, geopolitical process. Food doesn't have to be finite in the way it is in the world. So I'm just saying that I would prefer a definition that says struggles for material and symbolic resources,
Without them.
because finite is already, it's like the presence in politics is erasing the politics that creates.
So it assumes austerity.
I think I could imagine taking it away, taking the word out, but not erasing the reality that there's haves and have-nots, because there is enough. We produce enough food globally to feed everyone, but there's a lack of political will. And there are now the detrimental impact of the economy that's ravaged the world, that has created environmental conditions in which we cannot, it can't produce food at the level the population needs. But that we do have enough food. And I will say, the other example I was gonna give is that questioning the urban, and this is where my dean and I keep going back and forth about this idea, because she's like, listen, Buffalo's treated like a big mega city, but it's a mid-sized city with its own unique contextual and historical factors that are creating, that mean that the policies are insufficient to address the inequality that's happening in the system. And then I go, yeah, but it's got $1 billion budget, and it's not the same size as the New York City schools. So I haven't looked at this yet, but I want to see the percentage of, like, our budget for Buffalo Public Schools are the number of teachers, the number of students, versus what New York has. New York's figures for education that, we're measured on, and we can definitely critique and question those numbers, they're doing better than we are. They're doing a better job of educating their homeless children than we are in Buffalo. And I believe that the percentage of the budget that we have is much greater than what New York City has per student.
So what's going wrong?
Right.
Oh, that's the question.
I have a lot of theories. I bet Anthony has some ideas too. Solutions, that's a lofty dream, but
Sarah, this might be a good time to end because at 1:30, and I
Yeah,
know
sounds
some people
great.
have classes and all. But thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank
This
you.
has been
That was
fantastic.
Thank you. I would say too, please feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions or if you want to talk or anything. So yeah, glad
Very
to.
good. And you're welcome to stay
That's how we learn.
and have a conversation
Yeah.
too.
Thanks so much.